how many times I hear how supposedly amazing red light therapy is, there's a little voice in the back of my head that keeps going scam, scam, scam. And the thing that keeps drawing me back in is that it's supposed to be amazing for your sleep. In this video, I want to tell you if red light therapy is actually effective for your sleep. So in order to understand that question, we need to understand what actually is red light therapy. So it's also called photobiomodulation or low-level laser therapy. And in this video, I'm going to mostly call it red light therapy just because that's the most common layperson term. And unless I specify otherwise, I am specifically referring to photobiomodulation, which is the scientific term. So red light therapy refers to specific wavelengths and wattages of red and near-infrared light. And if you remember from like middle school science class, the light spectrum, red is at the very end of the visible spectrum, and then just outside of the visible spectrum, we have near-infrared light. And then over on the opposite end of the not visible spectrum, we have UV light. In order to be considered red light therapy, the wavelength needs to be somewhere between 600 and 1000 nanometers. So the most common use for red light therapy is to look at muscle and joint issues and to decrease inflammation. And the thing that was most surprising to me is there is an actual scientific basis for all this. So the treatment was discovered by accident in 1967 by Andre Mester, and he was studying tumors that had been implanted in lab mice. But in 1967, laser technology was pretty new, and the laser that he commissioned wasn't nearly as powerful as he initially thought. And what he found is that where the tumors had been implanted, the incisions healed more quickly, and the hair where the mice had been shaved grew back more quickly versus the control group. Obviously, that definitely got his attention. Things have been studied a lot more since then. And then fast forward to today, there is well over 1,000 studies looking at photobiomodulation and its effects on things like traumatic brain injuries and metabolism and recovery from exercise. And this does include its effects on sleep. Now, as far as results for these studies go, it does depend on what you're looking at and what's being treated as far as if there is actually any beneficial effect. This isn't magic, and any place that's trying to sell you a device who tells you it's going to cure like cancer and allergies and autism, like it's not magic. There's limitations to what it can do, but in very specific instances, it actually does have a beneficial effect. It's also worth noting it is very specific wattages and wavelengths that are effective for certain treatments. So now that we understand what red light therapy is, how does it work? So the effects are photochemical, and that basically just means the chemical effects of light. Going back to middle school again, you probably remember the term photosynthesis, which is the mechanism by which plants make food from UV light. And obviously, red light therapy is not exactly the same says photosynthesis, but it should give you an idea of what we're looking at. Another thing that shocked me is that red light therapy is capable of penetrating the skin. And now that I'm saying this, I realize that it makes logical sense since I know that UV light is capable of penetrating the skin. It also stands to reason that near-infrared light would also be capable of penetrating the skin. And it does depend on the wavelengths and wattages that are used for how deep into the skin it is capable of going. But there is a subset of red light therapy called transcranial transcranial photobiomodulation. And basically what that means is it is red light therapy's effects on the brain, meaning that depending on what wattages and wavelengths are used, that it's capable of penetrating the skull. So how this all works is that red light therapy is a very mild stressor that allows your cells to optimize their processes. So going back to middle school again, you're going to remember that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And so what happens is that by creating this mild stress, it allows the mitochondria to more effectively use ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. This in turn decreases oxidative stress, which is going to decrease inflammation. Also, this increases circulation, which in turn also decreases inflammation. So the question I'm sure you're all wondering is, okay, well then how does this impact sleep? And sadly, there's not as much scientific data as I would have initially thought based off of like manufacturer claims and device maker claims for how beneficial red light therapy is for sleep. I would have expected there to be a lot more scientific data than there actually is. And in fact, when you look into stuff in a little bit more detail, the benefits being claimed are primarily on circadian rhythm and using red light as an alternative to blue light late at night, which, I mean, if that's the case and we're just using it for ambient light, why would I spend over $1,000 on a red light therapy device when I can just get my Hue bulb, which is like $50, and set it to red? And that definitely got my skepticism up. That being said, there are 2 studies that look at the effects of red light therapy on the effects of sleep. And the one that looked the most promising looked at Chinese female basketball players and the effects of overtraining syndrome on sleep quality. So what they did is that everybody wore swimsuits to maximize the amount of skin that was exposed, and they treated under a full body device for 30 minutes. Now, they did see improved sleep quality and improved melatonin in the blood. But when you look into things in a little bit more detail, overtraining syndrome has a byproduct of having inflammation. So what that tells me is that by reducing the inflammation, you're decreasing the effects of overtraining syndrome, thereby lessening the insomnia. And most of us people who are wanting to better our sleep aren't these world-class athletes. We're just regular people struggling with our sleep. And, you know, that got me to thinking, okay, well then how is this analogous to a normal person's struggle with sleep? And I really had difficulty trying to figure how that impacts non-athlete people. So there was one more study that also did see good effects, and it looked at Insomniacs, and they treated red light therapy on specific acupuncture points. And they did notice decreased wakenings at night and decreased time to fall asleep, which definitely seems promising, but you know, again, how does that apply to regular people? A lot of us aren't going to have the benefit of having a device that can do specific acupuncture points. You know, if we're treating a larger area, how does that work? And other than this, there are no other studies that I could find that looked at red light therapy's effects on sleep. And in fact, when I was studying for this video, like I found more effects as far as like kids tooth grinding at night and red light therapy's effects on it versus effects on sleep and sleep quality. So that being said, like I'm not trying to say that there's not any effects on sleep. There's just not a lot of data out there. So one thing that I've really struggled with is that I've been considering a red light therapy device for literally years. And I've looked at reviews and other people's stories and like how red light has affected them. And one thing that I'm really having trouble reconciling is the fact that one commonality that I keep seeing as far as how red light therapy is affecting people is that a lot of people say like, oh, it really improves my sleep, or like if I don't use it for a while, I definitely notice the effects and I don't sleep as good. So like there's this anecdotal data out there, but yet there is this lack of scientific evidence to kind of connect the two. One other thing that I found that looked kind of interesting, it looked at red light therapy and its effects on stress. Now, they tested with mice and they found that in the mice, the cortisol decreased and serotonin increased. And now that I'm saying this, cortisol works in opposition to melatonin, and when cortisol decreases, melatonin increases. So one thing that I'm kind of wondering now that I'm just thinking out loud is maybe as a byproduct of this, maybe the mice are able to make melatonin more effectively or to make more melatonin, and that could possibly impact sleep as well. So at this point, I'm just kind of really frustrated as to why this isn't studied more extensively. And given the data that's out there, I'm not sure if there is any definitive benefit to using red light therapy versus me just like hanging out with my Hue bulb set to red late at night. And in fact, I am hesitant to make any recommendations as far as red light therapy goes, given the fact that there's a lack of data and the barrier to entry for this is so much higher than a lot of the other things that I've talked about. That being said though, I have given so much mental energy to thinking about this and considering if it is actually beneficial that I finally reached like, F it, and I bought one. I just got it recently. I'm still in the testing stages, and I'm going to put a video out once I have enough data to give a really good review. So subscribe if you're interested. I should have that good to go in the next like 2 to 3 weeks. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up so I know you enjoyed it. Sweet dreams!